Welcome to Disambiguation. I'm your host, Michael Fauscette. Each week, we interview experts in artificial intelligence, generative AI, and business automation to help business leaders understand how to use these tools for the biggest business impact. Our show today, From Human in the Loop to Human in the Lead, the road to Autonomic IT. I'm joined by Brian Amaro, Vice President of Customer Value and Partner Strategy at ScienceLogic. Brian, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. How are you doing today?
I am doing very well, thanks. To get started, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, about ScienceLogic? I mean, I know you've been with the company for a while and you moved from office of CTO, into advisory services, customer strategy. So tell us a little bit about that and about ScienceLogic. What do you do? What's the mission? And, how AI is involved here as you look at IT operations.
Sure. And Michael, I've spent a lot of time at ScienceLogic working across customer strategy, advisory, and operational transformation, as you said. So I tend to look at this through the lens of what actually changes for the customer, not just what the technology can do in theory, right? So I'm old school, right? And I still believe in people, process, and technology all working together. I guess that's old school nowadays.
Well, and in that order too, which I think
Right,
is definitely old school.
yeah. Yeah. So what ScienceLogic really does is connect service-centric observability, AI-driven operations, and intelligent automation into one operating model. And that matters because most enterprises do not need more data for the sake of more data. Companies buy all these tools and they get more and more data and they think that's better, right? Well, not necessarily. They need help understanding what matters, what is impacting services, and what action should be taken next, right? So really, as AI has become more and more central over the past several years, the mission has evolved from just helping teams understand incidents to helping them resolve problems faster and with more precision. Notice what I stated there. It's not about more incidents, right? It's about helping teams resolve problems. And I think that's what's old monitoring, old tech, ITSM, ITOM, ITIL. We can go into all that, but in all reality, that's what that focused on, right? Restoring service, getting that incident right. It's about resolving problems faster now with AI, right? And that's really the key shift. AI is not bolted on top of or the side or the back or anything else or in the front or the bottom. It's becoming embedded in how operations run. How this relates to ScienceLogic is actually, you have to understand our whole journey. And this is really interesting because a lot of companies have not taken this approach. Most of the companies have bolted on AI and saying, oh, we're now an observability AI platform, right? ScienceLogic, of course, was formed 23 years ago, 2003, right? We were a networking operating model, monitoring, so on and so on. We realized 3 years ago, you know what? We're great at monitoring. We're great at business service identification of health availability risk. But the AI part has to be separate. We literally took that monitoring component, our business, separated it. And we said, you know what? We need to build AI from the ground up. Hence came about Skylar AI, Skylar Advisor Analytics, and so on. We built our LLM from the ground up, looking at over 250, 300 different customer engagements, Fortune 500 customer engagements, where the customer told us what their outcomes were, what they wanted, what their needs were, what their pain points were, looking at the data. And we realized the monitoring platforms provide tons of data, tons of noise too, if you don't tune them correctly. So you have to look at AI is essential in identifying not only that monitoring component, the performance metrics and all the logs and all those other things you see out there, but also how the knowledge is being used within the organization. So we realized we had to build that from the ground up.
Well, that makes sense. So I know, and I use this in the title, Autonomic IT. I know you guys use this term, and the idea that self-healing, self-managing IT environments can anticipate and resolve issues without intervention, and that you're talking about that shift from help me to how do I not have to ask for help kind of a thing, right? Which is a big promise. But where are you guys on the journey today, and then what's realistic for enterprise IT right now versus kind of what's still aspirational?
You know, I have to start by saying autonomic IT is a journey, right? It's not a switch you flip, right? That is probably the most important way to ground our conversation going forward.
Mm,
The maturity progression is pretty straightforward and in my opinion common sense. Of course, I've been doing this for 30 years, so a lot of this comes into play here from this standpoint.
right.
I actually helped build the model, so I mean, when you think about it, you move from siloed IT where there's fragmented tools, limited visibility, and slow outcomes into coordinated IT, where service-centric observability starts to align those teams around business impact. And that's very important to understand because almost every organization, probably about 95% of most organizations, are in siloed IT, right? They have a lot of this
Mm,
reactive messaging around the system out there. So once you get into coordinated IT, from there you get into machine assisted and AI advised operations, right? This is your human in the loop, human on the loop, and so on, where
right.
intelligence helps actually accelerate decisions and guided and or guided governance automation moving forward. So if you think
Mm,
about automations in general, right, where machines are helping you decide what those automations be, you have to have a governance model around them. We know everybody can create automations. Well, that's the problem. Everybody creates automations.
yeah.
No one knows what's going on with them, right? So when you think about all this data coming together, it's really governing everything around it, but also making sure that it identifies and helps you with informed decisions from knowledge going forward.
Mm,
Now, of course, that long-term vision is autonomic IT, right? Where agentic AI basically can execute against, intent to continuously accelerate those outcomes, right?
mm,
And that's important to understand because what is real today is really assisted autonomy, right? AI can correlate those signals, identify likely impact, help trigger those actions that for those repeatable pieces of work, right? So humans will always step in for exceptions and escalations. And that's important to understand here because a lot of times everybody thinks AI is going to replace the human being. I think differently, right?
mm,
And that is really what's real right now. What is still aspirational is the idea that every enterprise is ready tomorrow for fully self-managing systems across every single workflow and every risk domain, right? I'll be very blunt, most are not,
yeah.
right? Most are not. And frankly, they should not pretend they are. I see a lot of companies out there. Oh, we have this. No, no, you don't. You really don't. You really. Um, I've countered several engineers, several CIOs in that fact. I'm not going to be shy on our conversation here. A lot of these companies in their current state are absolutely incapable of doing so. So
Mm,
with the politics and everything that are outlined in some organizations that are very, matrix complex, the whole works, everything, AI is going to be a very, very heavy lift. And sometimes there needs to be alignments and reorganizations in order to really take advantage of it.
mm,
Assisted autonomy is real, right? Broad, unconstrained autonomy is not a day one strategy. And unfortunately, a lot of misinformed CIOs and C-suite executives thinks, yes, day one I can get this, and that's not the way it works.
right. Well, I've been talking about, writing about when it comes to agentic, this progression, and I sort of think of it, part of this is trust, right? How do we build trust over time? And human in the loop, yeah, that makes sense when you're in a pilot or before you try to scale big. And human on the loop, and then kind of ultimately we get to this point where it's human in the lead. You've got a lot of experience working with enterprise to implement AI driven ops. How do you see that progression playing out? I mean, what does each stage sort of actually look like for in practice for an IT team?
I really like that progression because it reflects how mature organizations really adopt AI. And this is important because there's a caveat to this, and I'll get this to the end, but it's human in the loop is where most organizations start and where they should start, right? With human in
Mm,
the loop. AI is generating recommendations and insights, but humans approve that action, right? At this stage, the goal is not speed, the goal is trust formation. I think that's where a lot of misleading is around AI, is that it's just going to do for you. You have to trust the data, right? You are validating outputs, learning where AI is strong, defining those guardrails. This also is the most risky part of the adoption phase, right? That graduation of the reactive engineer to the proactive engineer is critical here. And I have a customer example around this. Multi-billion-dollar managed service provider, large operation organization. They enabled the technology to identify AI and root cause and identify automations behind it, right? Billions of log files. And the job of engineers and operators was to validate the root cause was correct, and the recommended automations to remediate the problem would work. Guess what the adoption rate was? 15%. Do you want to know the key reason why? I could do it faster.
Yeah.
But wait, in order for AI to know what to do, you have to train it. That's where a lot of mislead or misconceptions are about AI, really, is, it's understanding what the AI is going to do, approving it, governing it, and making sure the path forward is solid and successful, not just relying on any manner. Now, I asked that engineer, well, that's one thing you did in a day, or maybe 5 things you did today at scale. What if it happened 1,000 times? Now all of a sudden it becomes faster, right? Well, of course, but AI learns, and that's the thing, right? Now, human in the loop is exactly where AI is going to execute with those established policies, right? And service level boundaries. So as those engineers build that knowledge, they're actually building service level boundaries, right? The human turns to supervising the performance, watching those outcomes, stepping in for those exceptions, and refining governance as time goes on. They're no longer working the real problem. AI is, right?
Yeah.
And that's a very different role than manually approving everything, right? Stamp. That's different. Now, of course, human in the lead is where the human no longer is controlling every single step. And this is where our advisory around identifying availability, health, and risk comes into a serious play, because now the human is defining the intent, the business outcomes we actually want to achieve, the acceptable risk, right? And the policy models. So not only we're not working the problem anymore, we're defining the risk parameters around that, right? The AI is actually executing against those objectives. So the real maturity shift here in this is organizations move from controlling individual tasks to basically owning the outcomes. And when you think about it, the end state is not a person clicking yes faster. The end state is a human defining the rules of engagement.
Yeah. I mean, you think about that from a scale perspective, and honestly, it is a trust journey, but at some point when you reach that level of scale, and it's it's just simply overwhelming to think that you could operate with somebody sitting there pushing the button all day long, not to mention the fact that'd be a mind-numbing job. um I think getting past that's important, and I'm curious for you guys, how do you help organizations move past that and get to this model where humans are really leading the AI rather than just pushing the button?
Yeah, being that approval mode forever, right?
Right.
And that is exactly the trap with AI nowadays. And this is the problem, right? If someone is just sitting there clicking approve all day long, right? That's not governance, right? That is manual delay disguised as control. And that's actually the problem we have with AI nowadays. People aren't thinking outside the box, right? The way past this is to use early approvals to validate the pattern, define the guardrails, and measure the outcome. I always say this: if you can't measure the outcome, you really don't have a validated pattern, right? So once you know the scenario is repeatable and low risk, and this is important to understand too, you shift to policy-based control, but understanding if it's low risk enough to do it. You don't take high risk matters and automate them and expect them to work right away, right? It's those known scenarios you execute automatically within defined boundaries, right? Sometimes restarting a server if it's low risk enough, sometimes clearing a file system, sometimes restarting a service and so on, right? Those little things save a lot of time in the organization, right? Um, the high risk situations, you definitely always still want to escalate. This is how you move from supervision of every action to governance of the system itself, right? And then the final piece is observability of the automation and AI itself. So the human being really never gets out of managing AI. Decisions need to be transparent, audible, and measurable. If any one of those can't be done, you really should not be enforcing that AI. If you can't expect it, you are not governing it,
Right.
right? It's the old adage, inspect what you expect. And
Yeah.
only escalate exceptions, not everything.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we tend to think of it in a traditional governance way that's bolted on the back, and that it won't really work, right? It's got to be built in from the beginning. You mentioned Skylar Advisor, so we'll dig into that just a little bit more. I mean, designed to help IT teams turn overwhelming data into actionable insight. And I mean, obviously, when it comes to AI, that's the place to start. Data is the problem, and having clean data quality data. And I know your CEO, Dave Link, said teams are drowning in data but starving for
Mhm.
insights. What does Skylar Advisor actually change about how IT ops teams work day to day?
So it's really interesting, and it goes back to when like we introduce ourselves together. It's about we had to rebuild the whole system, right? Rebuild our thinking around AI. Skylar Advisor changes what it changes is the operating rhythm of the teams. You kind of pointed out most teams today are, and Dave says it all the time. Most teams today are spending too much time sorting through alerts, dashboards,
Mhm.
disconnected instance, trying to figure out what actually matters. So a lot of the day is consumed before they even can get to meaningful action, right? Skylar Advisor changes that by shifting the conversation from what fired to what matters, right?
Mm.
It helps rank issues by service impact, connects those technical issues to or signals to service context, and provides those guided next steps based on patterns and historical resolution paths. Right.
Yeah.
So it really reduces the decision friction because the platform is not just showing data 100% CPU, right? It's helping frame what should happen next. Hey, there was 100% CPU at 1232, but a million other things happen in the environment. We advise you to look at these investigations and decide from there what should actually happen next, right?
Mm.
It also supports that governed automation. And again, we spoke about this a little bit earlier too, where automations run rampant throughout organizations. I don't know how many times I've met with organizations where they have an automation engineer in infrastructure, an automation engineer in architecture, an automation engineer in IT service management. And I'm sitting there going, is anybody communicating about the centralized automation practice? Nope. Right. So when we think about it, it it it, if a scenario is known and there are defined guardrails, the workflow can move directly into intelligent automation to build a solid practice for the organization rather than having bespoke teams working on separate thing altogether. If the
Yeah.
situation is new or risky, it gets service for that human review. So it's not automated right off the start, right? So day to day, the change is kind of pretty simple. Less time triaging noise and more time improving service performance. That's the
Mm.
first question changes from what happened to really what deserves action right now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a significant shift, and as we said, looking at and trying to stop something that already happened versus how do you head off things before they happen. I mean, the Skylar platform that said you include observability, automation, AI, and compliance, and this is all in a single platform. So, from a business person's perspective, how do you translate that from IT ops speak in explaining that to them? Why does it matter? Why should I want to have these four capabilities together? And if they're siloed, what breaks? Why does it need to look like this?
To me, the market is telling us something very obvious. Seeing more does not automatically mean acting better, right?
Mm.
Observability is essential, but visibility alone does not reduce MTTR, does not increase mean time between failures or mean time between service impacting incidents. Visibility alone does not prioritize business impact. Visibility alone does not create governed actions. Kind of get my drift here, right? At the
Yeah,
same
yeah.
time, AI without service aware operational context is just inference floating in space. I call it situationally aware services, right? So if you think about a
Mhm.
pilot flying a plane, right? We all know the plane can take off and fly, and land by itself. Why is a pilot in the cockpit? Situational awareness, right?
Yeah.
So when we think about it, that is why the categories are kind of converging. Enterprises do not want one platform to show them data, another to infer what matters, and a third to maybe automate something if someone stitches it together, right? They
Yeah.
want one operating fabric that can see, reason, prioritize, and act in a very governed way. I think that's what
Yeah.
everybody wants. I think it
Yeah.
tells us the market is moving really past category separation and toward integrated operational intelligence. Talking with many of our customers, buyers care less about what bucket an analyst puts you in and more about whether the platform can help improve resilience, reduce toil, and make faster decisions at a lower risk. That's the primary line here, if you think about it.
Yeah.
Observability without action slows you down, right? And automation without intelligence creates risk. Many people trying to automate maybe the same thing, but doing it a different way creates problems.
Mm. I mean, in some of the recent things that I've seen from some of my larger, analyst firms, like Forrester and Gartner, you guys have really been named like a leader in a Forrester wave around AI ops and visionary in the MQ for observability. I mean, what does that tell us about the market and where it's heading, and then what businesses really need to think about to get both ops and observability and actually deliver real value?
Yeah, this could actually be a continuation with the prior question too, because I
Yeah.
think it tells us the market has moved beyond treating observability and AI ops like separate islands, right?
Mm.
And enterprises no longer want visibility over here, intelligence over there, and automation stitched on somewhere else, like I just stated. They expect intelligence to be embedded directly into visibility, right? Because the truth is, seeing more data does not improve outcomes if teams still cannot interpret what matters and act on it quickly. And that's important to understand too, because that is why spanning both matters. Observability gives you the service aware, normalized operational context across hybrid environments, where
Mm.
AI ops helps you correlate signals, identify probable impact, and guide decision making. When those two are connected, you move from raw telemetry to contextual intelligence and then into governed execution.
Mm.
So, really, Michael, to me, the signal from the market is pretty clear. Buyers do not want stitched together tools pretending to be a workflow, right?
Yeah.
They want one operational fabric that connects visibility, decisioning, and action.
Yeah.
That is where real value starts to show up. And I'm not talking, remember, people, process, technology. This is where the
Mm.
value comes in people, process, because it's
Right.
not in how many signals you collect, but in how you effectively turn those signals into outcome. And that takes human behavior.
Yeah. I mean, I've been talking a lot, especially this year, as more and more companies deploy agentic systems in different parts of the business. A lot about governance, or what I call governance by design. So, how do you build this in? And then, of course, trust has been a conversation that we've had around AI for a very long time, but especially over the last 2 or 3 years. And as more companies deploy these agents in their operations, I, what does good AI governance look like from an observability side? And then how do you use the systems, automated systems, to build confidence that they're going to do what they should do, especially like if you're in a regulated industry?
Yeah, so this you kind of hit my sweet spot with this question because as a project management professional PMP, this is
Mm.
kind of the nature of everything I do every single day, right? Governance is
Mhm.
everything to me. So AI governance is actually pretty simple conceptually, right? Even if it takes discipline to implement, right? First, you need clear guardrails, define service objectives, risk thresholds, policy boundaries that govern what AI is really allowed to do, right? Second, you need full auditability. That's non-negotiable. Okay. Every recommendation automated action has to be traceable and reviewable. Very important to understand that. If you can't trace it, if it can't be reviewed, go back to the drawing board and figure out the metric, right? Third, teams need transparency into what the AI did. I always laugh about that. Do you know how the AI was created? Well, no, it just did it. Okay, go back to the drawing board, right?
Yeah.
Why it did it and what outcome is produced is extremely important, right? The
Yes.
outcomes are everything because that's what defines value, not to me, ScienceLogic, but to the customer.
Right.
And that's where a lot of AI companies are mistaken right now. We can do this, is what I hear all the time, right? No, it's what the customer needs and how you're actually affecting that customer. And
Yeah.
of course, fourth, the AI system itself has to be observed like any other production system for deviation, performance, and unintended impact. It's important to understand AI is not perfect, nor will it
Yeah.
ever be perfect. In fact,
Right.
it's been said many times the worst AI is today, right?
Yeah.
The best AI will be the worst AI today. I mean, it's so on. We could go on and on about that, but this is
Yeah.
what creates trust, not the promise of autonomy, but the ability to constrain it, inspect it, and measure it. If you can't
Yeah.
constrain, inspect, and measure it, go back to the drawing board, right?
Yeah.
Because you should not be automating something if you don't have those parameters already defined.
Yeah. I mean, last time I checked, humans aren't perfect either. So, you know,
Far from it, right?
yeah, and no, but I mean, really, that I'm not to be flip because honestly, we've for years we've built governance, boundaries, ethics, all these things into operating our business, and to me, like, why should I add digital workers to my hybrid workforce? Why should this be different, right?
Mhm.
Um, I'm curious though, you shared an example earlier, but maybe dig into this a little bit. And it doesn't have to be that one, but take a real world example. And can you talk us through a little bit more about this transition, right, from reactive manual IT ops into at least something close to autonomous? What does that look like for a company, and what surprises did they encounter along the way?
And this comes back to working with science logic and being a consultant for a very, very long time.
Right.
Understanding the customer journey is very important going forward, and almost every customer journey starts with a common element. And all organizations are buried in event volume, right? Tool fragmentation and too much triage, too much manual triage, right? Whole operation centers, 500, 600, I've heard 1,000 people operation centers, all manual, millions, hundreds of screens across, a massive complex that's locked down with everybody looking at green and yellow every time. The
Yeah.
teams are working hard, but energy is not going into sorting incidents. Instead of improving service, or the energy is going into serving incidents instead of improving service outcomes. And that's important to understand because the way some technology over the past 15 years has really guided us is the incident is where everything needs to happen. And that's so not true, right? The first step usually is not autonomy, it is clarity, actually,
Yeah.
right? You normalize the data, improve service mapping, start connecting technical events to business context. That alone starts to change behavior because now not every signal or incident is treated as equally urgent, right? So
Yeah.
the next step we see with a lot of customers, and this is really how we progress through it, is AI assisted prioritization and guided response. You start to trust the AI, right? And see, instead of people trying to mentally correlate everything in a war room, which I am still mind blown. Mean time to innocence. The last room in the room, one in the room is guilty one, right? But understanding that the platform starts really identifying what is likely related, what services may be impacted, and what's next steps fit the pattern, right? So once you have that, once the organization understands the workflow and the risk boundaries, they start applying governed automation in repeatable areas, right? So they start grabbing all those automations from other people, right, and putting it together. Maybe enrichment, instant routing, event suppression, policy-driven remediation, the simple things, or prescribed, response flows. I call that machine learned information from automations, right? What usually surprises most of the organizations I've worked with is that the first win is actually not self-healing. The first win is reduced cognitive load and better decisions under pressure. They actually have the knowledge, the information to make better decisions to avoid outages, right? Once they get
Yeah.
that, then deeper automation becomes both a safer and, of course, the outcome of being safe, more valuable usually when you have proper governance around it. So the
Yeah.
first real value is not full autonomy. It's better judgment under pressure, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, we hear a lot about the elimination of jobs or how the AI is coming to take our world away, and and I started thinking about this over the last couple of years and talk about a lot around thinking of this as a digital workforce. So we have AI agents or digital workers, we have human workers, and together we're creating this hybrid workforce or hybrid model. In IT ops specifically, where do you see the role of the human operator, moving over time as AI takes on more of that, detection, correlation, even remediation work?
I think this is the most overplayed misconception about
Yeah.
AI there is, and the media drives this all the time. I can't stand it.
Yeah, me too.
I do not think the human operator disappears. I really don't. I
Yeah.
think the role actually gets elevated, right? AI is very good at handling detection, correlation, pattern recognition, repetitive triage, which removes a lot of that low-level value work from the queue, right? The stuff you just talked about too. Who wants to do ping checks all day long, DNS checks all day long,
Yeah.
right? That means those level one engineers can operate with much better context and insight. And this is a differentiator with ScienceLogic, right? We identify the insights to those low level engineers. Instead of
Mhm.
escalating everything blindly, they gain exposure to advanced diagnostics and resolution logic, which basically accelerates natural human learning, right? So at the same time, oddly enough, those level three engineers can shift toward higher value, work like architecture. Oh my gosh, blow my mind. Resilience engineering. Holy cow,
Yeah.
go figure. Automation design. And wait, the biggest mind blowing thing, more innovation. Instead of triaging and working on incidents or tickets, right?
Yep.
All of this is resulting in more revenue for a company. And I ask every CIO out there, now you could publish this all day long, this statement. If I'm a CIO wanting to grow my business, the goal is better leveraged engineers, not
Mhm.
fewer engineers,
Right.
right? AI compresses the experience gap while freeing senior talent to move the organization forward. So when I see these organizations relieving people, I'm like, wow, who's that CIO? Let me just sit down with them for a half hour and figure this out with them because they're making a mistake right now.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense, and I've had that conversation quite a lot lately. I pulling out the crystal ball, and this is in the world of AI, asking you to think, a few months ahead sometimes can be hard, but let's take a time frame of maybe 2 or 3 years. I mean, what do you think the biggest shift is gonna be in how businesses manage their IT environments? And then if I'm a CIO or an IT leader, what should I be doing right now to make sure that my team and I'm ready for it?
This is probably the most important question, because again, going back to, a lot of people just want everything today, right? I think the biggest shift in AI moves from being treated as an assistive feature to becoming part of the operating model itself. And that actually takes a roadmap, a planned a roadmap from advising and consulting over time, right? For a while, organizations have been experimenting with co-pilots, recommendations, summarization around the edges, and so on. Over the next 2 to 3 years, the bigger shift will be AI participating more directly in operational execution, but within business guardrails and defined objectives. It's very important to understand that.
Yeah.
That's where the roadmap plays out, right? You would never just implement something. I'm driving I just bought a Ferrari. I'm going to go race it, right? You would never do that, right? And that's the basic key balance: more autonomous execution, but still governed. Now, for the pragmatic CIOs, the priorities today are really not mysterious, right? Strengthen service mapping maturity, normalize and clean operational data, define clear automation and governance policies, and treat AI as an operational model shift, not a feature rollout. I think a lot of customers get wrapped up in all the features and whiz bang gadgetries and gizmos and knobs to turn. I mean, I was an old, HP OpenView engineer myself, so I get it. But you
Yeah.
really have to think out of that box, right? The companies that think out of the box and do that well are going to scale AI safely, right? The ones that skip those foundations are going to really create more noise with just a better brand name behind it, right?
Mhm.
Um, I talked about it earlier. I want to throw in a caveat to everything we talked about here today, right? Waiting for perfect data is usually an excuse to do nothing. Okay. The better approach really is to start where the operational pain is high, the workflow is clear, and the service context can be improved enough to make the first use case valuable. I actually develop a whole value framework around Skylar.
Mhm.
And it's important to understand the use cases and the value and the pain and what the customer wants to see first, rather than just throw technology at them and try to align to perfect data. Perfection is not the requirement. Relevance, context, and governance actually are the requirements.
Yeah. I mean, if perfection was a requirement, we would have never implemented any technology.
That's right, exactly, right? But you would be surprised how many people wait because they don't have perfect data.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, considering the state of data in most companies, that perfect, I think, barely good enough might be the goal for now. Yeah.
Exactly, right? Yep.
Well, so Brian, that's all the time we have today. But before I let you go, there's one thing I like to do at the end of every show. I like to get a recommendation for the audience. Somebody you like to follow, a thought leader, an author, somebody that you think would, resonate and help the audience to learn.
Yeah, one perspective I really appreciate is Ethan Mollick's work, especially co-intelligence, living with and working with AI.
Mm.
What I like about his framing is that it is practical and basically grounded. He does
Mm.
not treat AI as magic, right? And he does not treat AI as a replacement story. He treats it as a collaboration story, and that really resonates with how I think about AI and enterprise operations. The value is not just in what the machine can do on its own. The value is in how humans and AI work together in a way that improves judgment, accelerates learning, and creates better outcomes. So if your audience is really looking for one good read on how to think about AI practicality, I definitely point them to Ethan Mollick's Co-Intelligence because it frames AI the way enterprises should be thinking about it.
Yeah.
Um, as a collaborator, that changes how we get work done, not just another tool.
Mm. No, that's great. A great recommendation, and I love the idea of collaboration of what does that look like going forward. Well, Brian, thanks so much for joining. Really, really interesting conversation.
Thank you, Michael, for your time. Have a great day.
Thanks. You too. And that's the show for this week. Thank you all for joining us. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the show. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a review to help others find us. For more research on AI and other software, check out arionresearch.com. If you're an expert in AI, generative AI, or business automation, either as a provider or an end user, email your information to disambiguation@arionresearch.com. Don't forget to join us next week. Disambiguation is an Arion Research production. I'm Michael Fauscette, and this is the Disambiguation Podcast.